everything possible to keep the world from even noticing he existed. Mrs. Palmer eventually rallied a group of parents into what she proudly called a neighborhood watch, though it was really just adults taking turns pacing our street and glaring at Liam's windows. They wrote down the exact minute he left home, when he returned, what companies delivered boxes, and even how long his lights were on each night. It's important we track every detail, she declared at the next meeting, so we're prepared if anything goes wrong. But what stood out to me was how carefully Liam avoided creating anything they could twist into suspicion. He never lingered outdoors, never approached anyone first, and only answered when someone spoke to him directly. And even then, his replies were short, polite, and distant. No loud music, no visitors, no late-night noise. If he truly was some sort of threat, he was the most withdrawn one imaginable. One chilly evening in October, I stayed too long at the library finishing a history project, and by the time I started walking home, the streetlights had already flickered on. I cut behind the gas station to save time, and that's where 3 older boys stepped out of the shadows, blocking my way. Derek Holt and the 2 boys who followed him everywhere, Evan and Lance, the same group who'd made my first year of junior high feel like survival training. "Well, look who wandered out alone," Derek smirked, shoving me back against the metal siding hard enough that it rattled. "Little scholar finally without an escort." He was bigger than most kids our age, already sporting a faint mustache and the attitude of someone who knew he could intimidate anyone smaller than him. Evan and Lance were shorter, but they were the kind of kids who grew brave only when Derek was nearby, which made them even more reckless. They ripped open my backpack, scattering notebooks and pens across the stained asphalt. Lance grabbed the worksheet I'd spent my entire afternoon working on and ripped it clean down the middle. Evan kicked my stainless steel water bottle so hard it clattered across the ground and landed beside a leaking trash bin that smelled like spoiled milk. "Don't," I blurted out, wishing my voice didn't shake. "Please, I didn't do anything." "Ah, hear that?" Derek mocked, leaning in closer, his breath heavy with the scent of cheap candy. "They're about to start sobbing." He shoved me again, and the rough siding tore a small rip along the shoulder of my jacket. "Maybe we should remind you what happens when you act like you're smarter than everyone else." Evan pulled out his phone and began recording, grinning. "This is going online," he said. "Everyone's gonna see you cry." My stomach dropped. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing the ground would swallow me whole. Mom was going to be furious that I hadn't gone straight home. I should have asked one of the librarians to call my parents. I should have waited inside until someone else left. I should have done anything other than walk alone. Then a voice cut through the air. Quiet, steady, and completely out of place in that filthy alley. "Something going on here?" Liam stepped out from behind the dumpster near the back of the takeout place, where he must have been dropping off cardboard for recycling. He didn't yell. He didn't puff out his chest. He simply stood there, calm and still, looking at the boys with an expression so unreadable it made the hair on my neck stand up. He wasn't tall or broad, but the way he carried himself, feet planted, shoulders squared, eyes sharp, made it very clear he wouldn't back down if pushed. The boys froze. I watched the moment recognition washed over Derek's face. His smirk vanished like someone had wiped it off with a cloth. He swallowed hard, his bravado evaporating instantly. Liam's presence changed everything in an instant. Derek Holt and his 2 friends, Evan and Lance, froze immediately, their confidence evaporating. Suddenly they looked small, vulnerable, and unsure. "No trouble here, sir," Derek stammered, his voice shaking, far from the cocky tone he'd worn moments before. Liam didn't yell or threaten. He simply held their gaze with a calm, steady expression, the kind of calm that made even me tense. "Then move along," he said quietly. "Yeah, we're going," Evan mumbled, stuffing his phone into his pocket as if it were burning. Within seconds, all 3 boys scattered down the alley, leaving my scattered books and my backpack behind. I was frozen, heart pounding, unsure if I could even breathe. Liam crouched beside me and started gathering my notebooks. Up close, I noticed the faint lines around his eyes, the quiet exhaustion of someone who had seen too much. His hands were careful and gentle as he straightened the torn pages, making sure nothing else got damaged. "You okay?" he asked softly, handing my backpack back to me. I nodded, too nervous to speak. "Did they hurt you?" I shook my head. The scrapes on my shoulders stung a little from the wall, but that was nothing compared to what could have happened if he hadn't been there. "Good," Liam murmured, standing up and brushing dirt off his knees. "You should head home, it's getting dark." "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded but didn't smile, turning back toward the alley with shoulders slumped like he was carrying a world of unseen burdens. I reached home just as Mom was setting the table. One look at my ripped jacket and scraped hands, and she launched into full parent mode. "What happened? Are you hurt? Where have you been?" she demanded. I explained about the library, the boys, and someone stepping in to help. But I didn't say Liam's name. "This is exactly why I don't want you walking alone at night," she said, dabbing antiseptic on my palms. "There are dangerous people out there." I couldn't help thinking about the irony. The person everyone warned me about was the one who had protected me from real harm. The next day, Mom was waiting when I got home from school. Her face was pale, knuckles tight. "Mrs. Rivera saw you talking to him," she said, voice trembling with anger and fear. I specifically told you to stay away from that man. Mom, he just helped me. Don't defend him, she snapped. The venom in her voice shocked me. Mom rarely raised her voice. Do you understand what kind of person he is? What he did before his time in prison? I tried to explain about Derek, Evan, and Lance, about how Liam had just been taking out trash, about how he had never actually spoken to me before. But Mom wasn't listening. She was already grabbing her keys. We're going to see Pastor Anders now, she announced. The drive was silent and tense. Mom's hands gripped the wheel so tightly they were white, and she kept checking the rearview mirror as though I might disappear. Pastor Anders met us in his office, filled with crosses, family photos, and inspirational Bible verses. Normally, he was warm and grandfatherly, but today he was serious. He folded his hands on the desk, leaning forward slightly. People like this, Lila, know how to hide their intentions, he began. They wait for the right moment to gain trust. You must always be vigilant. Pastor Anders sighed, folding his hands like he'd given this same warning 1,000 times. Lila, people who hurt children rarely look like villains from a movie, he said gently. They look normal, they blend in. A coach, a neighbor, a polite man who smiles at the grocery store. Their power comes from trust. He pulled out a thin booklet from his drawer, a safety guide with photos of cheerful adults chatting with kids. I'd seen the same pamphlet taped on our school bulletin board. But in his office, with the lights low and Mom staring at me like she expected me to confess something, the picture suddenly felt unsettling. They observe, he continued, tapping a page that showed a smiling man handing a child a toy. They learn a child's habits. They look for weak spots. They offer help so the child feels safe with them. But he didn't offer me anything, I said, my voice small but steady. He didn't even ask my name. He just made those boys leave and walked away. Pastor Anders nodded slowly, as if I had proven his point. That's exactly how grooming begins, he said. He steps in as the hero, so you feel indebted. Next time, maybe he suggests walking you home. Then he might ask you to step inside for water, to wait out the rain, to look at his garden. It's a gradual progression. He flipped to a chart that outlined early behavior, trust building, boundary testing. The words all blended together into something dark and heavy. Mom squeezed my arm so tightly I winced. This is why I panic when you go near him, she whispered. You don't see the danger until it's too late. I nodded, even though the entire conversation twisted my stomach. Something wasn't fitting. If Liam was trying to lure kids, why did he avoid us like we carried the plague? I'd been watching him for weeks, and the pattern never changed. If the elementary bus pulled up, he vanished inside instantly. If a parent walked past with a stroller, he turned his back or stepped into his garage. If a toy rolled into his yard, he tossed it back without stepping out. If children biked by, he went inside, even if he was in the middle of watering plants. For someone supposedly scouting for victims, he spent a lot of energy staying as far away as possible. That contradiction stuck in my head like a grain of sand you can't shake out of your shoe. So I did what any stubborn 12-year-old with too much curiosity and too little sense would do. I started keeping track. Not because I wanted to prove the adults wrong, at first, but because nothing matched what they were telling me. I found an old composition notebook in my backpack and turned it into a log. I wrote down the time he left home, the time he returned, what he watered, when he turned his porch light on, when he turned it off, when he opened his front door, how long he stayed outside. It almost felt like I was conducting a science experiment. Liam's routine was clockwork. 4:45 p.m. Left for his overnight shift at the shipping depot on the far side of town. At 10 a.m., again returned home, always looking exhausted. Weekends. Garden work, quiet, no visitors. And the strangest part? His garden was positioned in a weird but deliberate way. He had a perfect view of the corner where middle schoolers gathered for the morning bus, but he also had a direct path to slip inside if kids came too close. He planted everything with military precision. Rows of tomatoes, marigolds, beans, peppers, and herbs, each marked with hand-labeled stakes. But the moment a child appeared within 10 feet of his yard, he put down his tools and went inside without a word. The more I watched, the less the warnings made sense. He seemed less like a hunter, more like someone avoiding danger, not causing it. But at 12, I didn't have the words for any of that. All I had were questions no adult seemed willing to answer. Each little wooden marker in Liam's garden was written in neat, careful handwriting. Basil, cherry tomatoes, snap peas, wild mint. The layout was so precise, it reminded me of the diagrams in my science textbook. His yard didn't look like the work of someone sneaking around. It looked like the project of someone who found peace in tending things that couldn't hurt him. And the way he reacted when kids showed up? It was less like he was hunting them. More like he didn't want them anywhere near him. One breezy Saturday morning, I decided to push the boundary a little. Mom wanted me inside doing chores, but I slipped onto our front porch with a novel and sat where Liam could clearly see me. It wasn't subtle. I practically planted myself like a signpost. Within a minute, the curtain in his front window shifted. But instead of coming outside or trying to wave me over, he stayed hidden, eyes on the street, not me. That's when I noticed something strange. A white panel van I didn't recognize rolled slowly down our block. The kind with no windows, the kind adults always warned us about. Liam moved to another window, tracking it. His shoulders were tense even through the glass. When the van looped around and crept past again, he finally stepped out onto his porch. He stood there stiff, watching every inch of its movement until it disappeared around the corner. He didn't look at me once. Later, when I told Mom, she got tense immediately. What kind of van? Did you see the driver? Was it following anyone? But the moment I added that, Liam had been watching it too. Her entire demeanor shifted into something bitter and rigid. He was probably the one driving it earlier, she muttered. That's how they check out neighborhoods. That didn't track. If he was checking us out, why would he then guard the street from his porch? Over the next few days, I paid closer attention, not to the rumors, but to the specifics the adults kept ignoring. He'd added motion lights on both sides of his house, aimed partly at War Yard and the Rivera's our driveway. He parked his old sedan outside instead of in his garage, almost like he wanted a clear view of the road. He trimmed the hedge between our houses down to waist height, something Mom appreciated until she realized it allowed Liam to see our front step from his kitchen window. To anyone else, maybe it looked creepy. To me, it looked like surveillance. Like someone keeping watch. One Wednesday afternoon, I decided I needed real proof. Instead of heading straight home after school, I veered toward Riverside Park, the hangout spot for the older troublemakers. Mom had strictly forbidden me from going there alone, which made it the perfect place to test my theory. Sure enough, as soon as I passed the rusted swings, I spotted them. Derek Holt, Evan, Lance. They were sprawled on the picnic tables near the basketball court, acting like they owned the entire park. Well, look who wandered in, Derek called, tossing his half-smoked cigarette into the grass. Little library mouse. I turned, trying to walk away calmly, but they spread out, blocking every exit. You're shaking, Lance taunted, tilting his head with that cruel half-smile he always wore. Maybe we should walk you home, make sure nothing happens. The way he said it turned my stomach. Evan pulled out his phone, the same move he'd done last time. Let's make another video. Bet this one goes viral. My skin went cold. What if I'd imagined it all? What if Liam wasn't on watching? What if everything I thought was wrong and I'd just walked straight into danger for nothing? They stepped closer. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it over the rustling leaves. Then, footsteps behind me. A steady, unhurried stride. A voice calm but firm, carrying more authority than yelling ever could. Found you, neighbor? Found you, Liam said, as if we'd casually arranged to meet, his tone calm enough to make Derek and his crew instantly rethink their life choices. He didn't yell or threaten them, he just existed, and that was enough. The three boys drifted backward, suddenly fascinated by anything that wasn't me. Derek pretended to relight a cigarette. Evan kept checking his phone. Lance stepped behind the picnic table like he was trying to disappear. You ready to head home, Lila? Liam asked gently. My throat felt tight, but I managed, yeah, ready, without sounding as terrified as I was 2 seconds earlier. He didn't lecture me right away. He just walked beside me until we reached the sidewalk bordering the park. The air felt heavier there, like he'd been waiting for a line he didn't want to cross. That was dangerous, he murmured, not looking at me. You put yourself in the middle of something you're not equipped to handle. I blinked at him. How did you even know I was there? I didn't. He finally met my eyes, and the concern there made my stomach twist. I was cutting through the park to get to the corner store. I heard voices, recognized yours, the tone. His jaw tightened. Don't test things like that again, Lila. Those boys aren't playing games. He turned to walk away, then paused and added, if you want to know something about me, ask. Don't risk your safety to figure it out. All night I replayed those words. He hadn't been angry that I watched him. He'd been angry that I risked myself. Why? The next Saturday, I finally worked up the courage to talk to him again. He was kneeling in his garden, adjusting the stakes around a row of tomato vines. The fence between our yards felt like a barrier and an invitation all at once. You said I could ask, I said, fingers hooking through the chain link as I stepped closer. He set his trowel aside and gave me his full attention. Up close, the sadness in his eyes wasn't simple sadness. It was the kind carved into someone by years of carrying a weight no one else could see. Why does everyone in this neighborhood think you hurt kids? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. His expression didn't change at first. Then something in his face softened. No, collapsed, like a person finally realizing he couldn't outrun the truth. I hurt someone, he said quietly. Just not the way people think. Before I could ask what that meant, Mom's voice cracked across the yard like lightning. Lila Marie Johnson, step away from that fence right now. She stood on the porch, phone raised like she was ready to call the police on the spot. I was just inside now. Her tone left no room for argument. That evening, she sat me at the kitchen table, her posture iron stiff. She'd already called Pastor Anders, who then called someone he knew at the police station, someone who reminded her of Liam's parole restrictions. You could have sent that man back to prison, she said, rubbing her temples. Do you understand that? Speaking to a minor is a violation. But he didn't do anything. That doesn't matter, she snapped, then immediately pressed her lips together like she regretted the sharpness. Lila, you disobeyed me. You put yourself in danger, and you interfered with a convicted felon's parole conditions. That is serious. I wanted to tell her about Derek and his friends, about the white van, about the security lights, about how Liam always seemed to be watching the street, not the children. But the fear in her eyes was real, raw, and I knew pushing back would only make everything worse. "Promise me," she said, gripping my shoulders hard enough that I felt her hands even after she let go. "Promise me you'll stay away from him. No more watching, no more talking, no more—" I promised Mom I'd stay away from Liam. No talking, no watching, nothing. But the words he'd said kept replaying in my mind. I hurt someone, just not the way people think. That sentence stuck to my ribs like a splinter. Late Thursday night, I woke to shouting. Not normal neighborhood noise, rage, male voices, threats. I slipped to my window and parted the curtains. 3 men had Liam cornered on his own front lawn, all of them older, broad-shouldered, dressed like they'd come prepared for violence. One shoved him hard enough that he staggered. "We know what you are," the man growled. "We know what you did," another barked. "Kids aren't safe with you here." Liam didn't raise his hands, didn't shout, didn't even flinch when the third man jabbed a finger in his chest. "Maybe we should take care of this ourselves," the third man said, voice cold enough to make my stomach twist. "Spare the town the trouble." Still, Liam stood there, hands loose at his sides, accepting every shove, every insult. "I get why you're angry," he said quietly. "I understand why you don't want me here." "Then leave," one spat. "Pack your stuff and go before something happens." "We've got children," another added. "We're not letting a monster live next door." Liam finally lifted his head and looked directly at my bedroom window. For the briefest second, our eyes locked. What I saw wasn't fear, wasn't guilt, wasn't even anger. It was exhaustion. A man tired of being misunderstood, hunted, hated. "I've never harmed a child," he said, still looking toward me. "I never would." The men scoffed, cursed, and eventually walked off, throwing warnings over their shoulders. But Liam stayed outside long after they were gone, standing alone under his porch light like he didn't have the energy to move. I watched him until my eyes burned. He didn't go inside until almost sunrise. The kitchen light flicked on and stayed on. The next morning, I found something taped carefully to our mailbox. A small folded note written in neat, steady handwriting. "Look up the news archives, March 15th, 2018. The truth." My heart pounded. He'd written it for me, only me. I waited until Mom left for Saturday errands, then grabbed my bike and pedaled to the downtown library. The reference librarian, Mrs. Delgado, led me to an old computer and helped me open the digital newspaper database. My fingers trembled as I typed the date, March 15th, 2018. The headline hit me like a punch. "Local man sentenced for assault on registered sex offender." It wasn't about Liam being the predator. It was about him attacking one. My breath caught as I read the first paragraph. The offender, Gregory Maddox, had been abusing multiple neighborhood children. The article said the case had been sealed in parts because the victims were minors, but it described Liam discovering patterns no one else noticed. Kids entering Maddox's house cheerful and leaving shaken. Parents dropping children off for tutoring sessions that ended with tears. Behavior changes. Nightmares. Avoidance. Liam had connected the dots. The police hadn't. The neighborhood hadn't. No one had. Until Liam confronted Maddox. The article didn't go into detail about what happened during that confrontation, but it was enough for Liam to be arrested for assault, and Maddox to remain alive long enough to be prosecuted. My throat closed as the truth unfolded in front of me, and he'd been punished for it. Liam had risked everything to protect the children no one else seemed to see. When authorities ignored his warnings about Gregory Maddox, he confronted the man himself. The encounter turned violent, and Liam was arrested for assault, but buried deeper in the news, a quote from Detective Olivia Hayes revealed the truth. While Mr. Kane's actions were legally punishable, his unwavering insistence on reporting suspected abuse likely prevented additional victims. Multiple children have since come forward with allegations against Mr. Maddox, who is now facing serious felony charges. My hands shook as I scrolled through related articles piecing together the full story. Maddox had lived quietly in another part of town for over a decade. Outwardly, he was a model citizen, running youth programs at the community center, offering babysitting to struggling families, organizing sleepovers and camping trips for disadvantaged kids. But behind the smiles, he was abusing the very children he pretended to protect. Liam had recognized the same patterns early. When initial complaints to the police were dismissed, he meticulously documented every detail. Children leaving Maddox's house visibly distressed, license plates of suspicious drop-offs, even tracking Maddox's interactions in public spaces. He had tried every legal channel, police, child protective services, the school board, even the FBI, but they all told him, suspicion isn't enough evidence. Determined to stop him, Liam gathered irrefutable proof himself. Court records I found at the library showed that when Maddox laughed off his warnings and threatened him, Liam acted decisively. The confrontation ended with Maddox hospitalized. 3 broken ribs, a concussion, a shattered wrist. Liam was arrested, sentenced to 3 years for assault, but his actions unlocked the truth. Within days, victims began coming forward. Parents recounted the horrors of tutoring sessions and camping trips, Evidence piled up. Charges multiplied. By the time Liam's sentence was finalized, Maddox faced 17 counts of child sexual abuse, 43 counts of child pornography possession, and numerous child endangerment charges. Every accusation Liam had made was correct. Every step he'd taken to protect children had been accurate. Yet he had been punished, branded a criminal by a community that never bothered to look beyond the surface. I sat there, staring at the computer screen, stomach turning. The story we'd all believed about Liam was completely wrong. He hadn't been the danger. He had been the protector. Our neighborhood had failed him. But now, finally, the truth was out. Every adult in our neighborhood had judged Liam based on whispers, not truth. We had painted him as something monstrous while never bothering to uncover the real story, the story of a man who had lost his freedom trying to shield children from an actual predator. My backpack felt heavy on the ride home, stuffed with printouts that shattered everything I thought I knew. I kept replaying one question. How many places had Liam been chased away from because nobody cared enough to look deeper? When I walked inside, Mom was already standing in the kitchen, arms crossed like a fence I had no chance of getting around. "Where did you go, Lila?" she asked sharply. Instead of lying, I emptied my backpack and spread the articles across the table like evidence at a trial. I watched her face change as she read, anger shifting to confusion, then horror. Her fingers trembled halfway down the first page. "Oh, God," she whispered, eyes darting over the lines. "We were wrong. We were all horribly wrong." She read every article more than once. By the end, she sank into a chair as if someone had pulled the world out from under her. "That man," she breathed, voice cracking. "He went to prison trying to protect kids, and we treated him like a danger." "There's more," I said quietly, pushing the sentencing reports toward her. She read about the 17 victims, the years they suffered, and how Gregory Maddox hid behind community respectability. Watching Mom absorb the truth felt like watching a mirror shatter. "How did we misjudge this so badly?" she cried. "How did we see everything backwards?" "Because people only heard the scary part," I said, and no one bothered to look at the rest. That evening, Mom did something I never expected. She walked across our yard, straightened her shoulders, and knocked on Liam's door. I watched from behind the curtains as she handed him the articles. She spoke softly. I couldn't hear the words, but Liam listened closely, nodding a few times before quietly closing the door. When Mom came back in, her eyes were swollen. "What did you say?" I asked. "I apologized," she said simply, and I told him I was ashamed of how we treated him. "What did he say?" "That he understood why we reacted the way we did. He said fear makes people jump to conclusions, and he didn't blame us." The next few days plunged the neighborhood into chaos. Mom started calling other parents, sharing the truth. Some refused to believe it, claiming the articles had to be fake or biased or missing something. But others began to admit that the story we believed never truly added up. Mrs. Palmer was the hardest to convince. She had led the charge against Liam, organizing meetings, patrols, late-night watch groups. "This is too convenient," she insisted when Mom showed her the files. "How do we know he didn't fabricate all this? People like him." But her argument died when Pastor Anders contacted officials in Liam's former neighborhood and confirmed every detail. Even Mrs. Palmer had no choice but to accept that we had judged an innocent man. A week later, squad cars rolled down our street. But not for Liam. They stopped 2 houses away, at the home previously owned by Gregory Maddox. The truth had finally caught up with our neighborhood, and everything we thought we knew had been turned inside out. Across town, in the house now owned by Dr. Malcolm Pierce, the truth was finally emerging. Dr. Pierce had moved in just 2 years ago, not long after Liam had been released. On the surface, he presented himself as a community pillar, hosting workshops on child safety, running after-school tutoring at his home, and volunteering to counsel children traumatized by the Maddox case. But behind that facade, he was continuing the same sick work Liam had suspected all along. When police raided Dr. Pierce's house, investigators uncovered evidence that made even seasoned detectives recoil. Hundreds of files, videos, and photos revealed ongoing abuse involving at least 12 children from our neighborhood, including my friend Jenny, who had been attending tutoring sessions twice a week. That's when everything finally clicked. Liam hadn't been avoiding contact with children to hide himself. He had been watching Dr. Pierce. Every time I saw him in his garden, positioning himself with precision, every careful routine he followed, it was all part of building a detailed record. He had learned from his past mistakes. He wasn't confronting the predator directly this time. Instead, he documented everything meticulously, preparing an evidence trail that no one could dismiss. Detective Olivia Hayes held up a thick manila envelope, the one Liam had compiled over 3 years. It contained telephoto photos of children entering and leaving Pierce's home, vehicle records of parents dropping kids off, detailed behavioral observations, and even records of conversations between Pierce and Gregory Maddox, which Liam had somehow captured during prison visits. "He's been working on this case for 3 years, Detective Hayes told the parents and reporters gathered. "Liam provided the critical evidence that allowed us to prosecute." That night, I found Liam in his backyard, watching the police swarm 2 doors down. Ignoring Mom's calls from our porch, I ran over. "You knew?" I asked, voice tight. "All this time, you knew kids were being harmed?" Liam's eyes, weary and haunted, met mine. "I suspected," he said softly. Maddox mentioned him in letters. I knew something would happen. Why didn't you report him immediately? I did, multiple times, but I'm a convicted felon. Reporting a respected psychiatrist? Who would take me seriously? The weight of his words struck me like a blow. 3 years he had been trying to protect us, and no one listened. So you just watched? I whispered. I watched. I documented. I gathered evidence that couldn't be ignored. I tried to keep children safe even when I couldn't intervene directly. His voice cracked slightly, heavy with the burden he'd carried. Do you know what it's like to know kids are being hurt and be powerless to stop it? Detective Hayes approached, expression calm but respectful. Liam, we'll need your full statement and all the documentation. He handed her the manila envelope, every page carefully dated, every photo and observation in order. Months of painstaking work, finally ready to bring a predator down. Detective Olivia Hayes flipped through the thick files, her eyes widening. Even the financial records, every transaction? She asked. Yes, Liam replied quietly. I've been compiling evidence for 3 years, practicing, documenting, tracking everything I could. Over the next several weeks, the neighborhood shifted completely. Families who had once crossed the street to avoid Liam now brought him cookies, letters of apology, and tearful smiles. Children who had been told to fear him learned that he had quietly protected them all along. Mrs. Palmer spearheaded what she called an apology campaign. She personally went to Liam's porch first. I ruined your life, she admitted, voice shaking. I organized the whole neighborhood against you. I made everyone afraid of you. Liam's response was calm, almost gentle. I can't fault you for trying to protect your family, he said. His tone held no bitterness, no resentment. Even as neighbors offered grand gestures, home repairs, public recognition, or community fundraisers, Liam politely refused everything. When a local news crew wanted to cover the story, he declined. I didn't do this for recognition, he told the reporter. I did it because children deserve to be safe. When Mom asked what the neighborhood could do to make amends, Liam's answer was simple. I don't need recognition. I just need to know kids are safe. 3 months after Dr. Pierce's arrest, Liam put his house up for sale. Not because harassment continued, it hadn't, but because he had finally found what he'd been seeking since his release. Peace. He had endured isolation, suspicion, and constant judgment, all while quietly protecting children. Now the truth was finally known. The real predator was caught. The neighborhood was safe. His work was done. The day before he moved, I found a note on my porch. Lila, it began. Thank you for having the courage to see the truth when all the adults around you stopped looking. You noticed what others missed, asked questions others were afraid to ask, and refused to accept easy answers to complicated situations. Keep trusting your instincts. The most important truths are often the ones that make people uncomfortable. The people who seem dangerous are not always the ones to fear. Sometimes they are the ones quietly trying to save you. He signed it, Liam. P.S. He had left a small metal lockbox buried behind the sunflowers in his garden. Inside was a key and a note for my bike lock, reminding me that children should be able to ride safely without fear. There was also a photograph, one I would treasure forever. A photograph I found in Liam's old papers showed him in a crisp military uniform, much younger, standing with a group of soldiers in front of a building marked Afghanistan 2009. The handwritten caption read, Military Police. Sometimes protecting people requires sacrifices most can't understand. I later learned that Liam had served as a military police officer overseas, focusing on investigating abuse cases involving contractors and local officials. Twice decorated for his work shielding civilians, including children, from harm, he had essentially dedicated his entire adult life to protecting the vulnerable from predators. Within 6 months, the house where Dr. Malcolm Pierce had lived was demolished. The property had been deemed too contaminated by the horrors that occurred there. In its place, the city built a small park, complete with a playground and a community garden. Near the swings, a modest plaque reads, In memory of courage for those who speak up when no one wants to listen. I sit on that bench sometimes, thinking about Liam, how he spent 3 years in prison, another 3 under neighborhood suspicion, all for trying to protect children. I think about how many kids might have been spared if we had listened from the start, instead of believing gossip and assumptions. I think about how he continued his quiet vigilance even when everyone else feared him. Now, at 25, I work as a social worker specializing in child protection. Everyone at the office knows Liam's story, how a man misunderstood and feared by the community became the guardian angel we desperately needed. His example guides how I approach every case, how I listen to every report, and how I investigate every claim. I've learned to look beyond surface accusations, to uncover the whole truth, even when it's uncomfortable or complicated. I've learned to pay attention to those others dismiss. The witnesses labeled unreliable because of their past, the reporters whose history makes people uneasy, the advocates who ask questions institutions prefer to ignore. Sometimes, the person everyone warns you about is the only one telling the truth. Sometimes the real monster hides behind credentials, community respect, and a friendly smile. And sometimes protection comes from the most unlikely places. from someone who has already lost everything, yet refuses to stop caring. Liam taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when the world punishes you, even when no one believes you, even when helping others costs you everything. Last month, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a child trafficking ring uncovered in another state, and a note in familiar handwriting. Some fights never end, but they're always worth fighting. Stay safe. Keep asking questions. A friend. I don't know if Liam was involved in that investigation, but I hope he was. I hope he's out there somewhere, still watching over children who need protection, still making sacrifices others will never understand. Because the world needs more people like Liam Torres, people who see dangers others overlook, who act when institutions fail, who sacrifice reputation, freedom, and safety to protect the innocent. People who understand that sometimes being the one everyone warns you about is exactly what the world needs.